Hey guys, my name is Deb Marnie and I'm from Aussie Maille, and this is our chain mail tutorial channel. Hey guys, big hi, hello, welcome, how are you? It is really great to see you today. Thanks for popping in and spending some time with me. So today I have a weave tutorial for you. This one's from the Celtic, or the Celtic, however you like to pronounce that word. Anyway, it's from the Celtic weave family. Alright guys, let's jump straight into it. Okay guys, I've got a couple of sample pieces made up here for you of the Celtic Mosaic weave. So coming up here on the side of the screen will be the ring sizes that I used to make up these particular samples, and they will also be listed in the description section that you can find down below this video. But to run through them quickly with you now, so starting with this piece here, our largest ring is 16 gauge AWG, that's 1.2 millimeter diameter wire, ring ID of 8.5 millimeters. The next largest ring is also 16 gauge AWG with a 6 millimeter ID. Our next ring is 18 gauge AWG, that's 1.0 millimeter diameter wire with a ring ID of 3.5 millimeters, and then our tiny ring, again also 18 gauge but with a ring ID of 3.25 millimeters. Our next one uses 18 gauge AWG 7 millimeter for the largest ring, 18 gauge 4.75 millimeter ID for the next ring. We go down to 20 gauge AWG 0.8 millimeter wire diameter with a ring ID of 3 millimeters, and our final ring is 20 gauge AWG with a ring ID of 2.75 millimeters. Okay, so to start this weave off, we want to take up one of our extra large rings and pop on 4 of our small rings. So, and then close those. So you can pre-close your small rings, or you can just pop them on straight out of the bag and then do them up as I am here. Whatever is your preferred way of doing it. So once you've got those 4 small rings placed on your extra large ring, take up one of your large rings and feed it through one pair of your small, and then double that ring up. Okay, so that your work should look something like this. We're then going to flip those pair of large rings so that this sits one on each side of your work. We're going to fold it all the way back against your work, all the way back, splitting that pair of small rings and popping your extra large rings up through, popping your large rings up so they sit all the way up through there like that. And then onto them we're going to place 2 more of your small rings. And that's going to lock those large rings into place for you. Okay, and your work should look something like this. Next, we're going to take up another one of our extra large rings, and we're going to feed it down between our 2 large rings, picking up just this last pair of small rings that we've put in. So position those small rings so that you've got one on each side of your piece, and we're going to bring our extra large ring so that it comes down in between the large rings, goes through one of the small rings, brings it back up, going through the other small ring and coming out the top, and then closing that up. Okay, so your work should look like this, and we want to make a chain like this for about the length that we need it to be, plus maybe 1 or 2 extra units. So you can add to this as you go along, so it's not too critical that you know exactly what it is, but you need at least you know, a little bit of extra length because it does get smooched up just a little bit. Not a great deal, but just enough that you will need to add 1 or 2 extra units. So to continue your work, add 2 of your small rings to your extra large ring. And then once you've got those 2 rings in place, take up a large ring and feed it through the 2 small rings. Okay. Double your large ring up. So your work should look like this. And then, as we did before, flip those large rings all the way back. So hold on to your extra large ring between your thumb and your finger there. Flip the large rings so they sit one on each side of your work. Fold them all the way against your extra large ring, splitting your small rings so you've got one sitting on each side. Okay, and then pulling your large rings all the way up. Okay, so that they sit all the way up like this in your work. To lock them into place, take another small ring and feed it through those 2 rings and close it up, and of course double that ring up. Okay, so your work should look like this. Place those 2 rings that you just added, so you've got one sitting on either side of your work. We're going to want to place our next ring in between our 2 large rings here, scooping up those 2 small rings that we just placed. So just take up an opened extra large and then going between the large rings, scooping up the first of your small rings as you go down, and as you bring it back around, scooping up the second of your small rings, sorry, like that, and then doing it up. So just repeat those steps, guys, as I said, for the length that you require your bracelet to be, plus, you know, maybe 1 or 2 extra units. It's always easy to add or remove, so it's not a huge deal, but you will need to add 1 or 2 extra units depending on the gauges that are used. So you guys go ahead and do that. Pause this video and do that, and when you're ready, meet me back here and I will show you what we do next. Okay, so I've made up a section of our centered chain, and then our next step is to add some small rings. So for our first extra large ring, we're going to need a total of 6 rings or 3 pairs of our small rings. So you should already have 1 pair of rings on there from the beginning. So you just need to add 2 more pairs of rings to that one. And then a pair of rings on each side of every extra large ring in your weave until you get to the end one, where you again will need 3 pairs of rings in that one. So if you guys go ahead and add all of your small rings to the extra large rings, remember 1 pair on each side of all of the extra large rings that are in your weave. Go ahead, do that, guys. Pause this video, do that, and I will meet you back here when you're ready to move on to the next step. Alrighty, so I've gone ahead and added all the small rings that I need to my extra large rings. So a pair on each side of the ones in weave and 3 pairs on the end rings. So next you want to go and take up a large ring and feed it through each of the pairs of small rings or feed through 2. So you want 2 of your large rings through each of the pair of small rings in your weave. So you can do that as you go, you can do it all in one go, totally up to you guys. But just add your rings like this. I've just realized I'm one ring short here, so I'll just pop on another small ring. And then add my pair of large rings. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that, adding of large rings to the next rings in the sequence. So as I said, you can do it all the way down if you want. If that's the case, pause the video here and add all of your large rings to your small rings. And then when you're done, meet me back here and I'll show you what to do. Otherwise, I suggest doing what I'm doing here and just putting them all on the first and the second of your extra large rings. And then we can add the large rings, more large rings as we go down. Okay, so I've added my large rings and I'm going to go back to this pair of or set of rings here on my first extra large ring. And as we did before, I'm going to split them so that they sit one on each side, fold them all the way back, and so that the extra large rings, large rings pop up. And then while I'm holding on to that, I'm going to do the same for the next set of rings, so that I've done this, folded them back and popped them up twice. So there is a couple of ways of doing these, guys. So you can do these one at a time, and I'll show you both ways, okay? So let's say we're going to do these one at a time. So we've folded that up, and what we're going to do now is we want to lock those in place, but we're going to use one of our extra small rings here. You can use the small rings as you have been doing, but I find that it's just a little bit too loose and I didn't like the way that the weave sat, so that's why I brought in a 4th size. So with your extra small or your tiny rings, lock those 2 folded rings into place. Okay, and then we can do that with the one going down the chain. Again, holding on to the work, folding those rings all the way back, separating out the small rings that are in place, and then locking our large rings with a tiny ring. Okay, pop it through both of the large rings and of course double that up. Okay, so this is what our work looks at the moment. And what we then want to do is take up another one of our tiny rings, and we're going to join these 2 sections of chain together. So the 2 that we just folded back, we're going to join those together. And to do that, we need to put our new tiny ring through a total of 6 of the small rings. So you can see those rings there. So we're going to go through the tiny ring we just added, and then through 1, 2, 3, and 4 of our small rings, and then through the tiny ring on the other. So you can see that this is tight. doesn't leave us a lot of space to grab our rings with our pliers. So if you're not comfortable with working with such tight fitting rings, you may find that difficult and frustrating. Now, as I said, you can swap out those tiny rings for the small rings. It does make your weave unstable, or a little bit more unstable, more loose than I was happy with, which is why I decided to go down to those tiny rings. So it can be done. It's certainly not impossible, but it is tricky and it does need a little bit of patience. If you like the look of those tiny rings but find trying to slip that connecting ring into 6 a little difficult, we've got another way of doing this. We'll start fresh, we'll do it on the other side. So our other way of doing it, and it's only really difficult for the first step, and then after that it becomes a little bit easier. But again, we're going to flip those end pair of large rings, okay? Flip them all the way back, separate out our small rings, and pull those large rings all the way up. Now, this is the tricky bit. You need to keep those ones in place while you do the same for the next unit. Okay, and although it's frustrating, it's not impossible to do. This one's a little trickier because we've already got 3 rings in place, and the last ring is, or the last set of rings is a little bit trickier to do at the best of times. So there we go. Just going to grab my awl and pull those up. So, as I said, that's a little bit trickier than it needs to be because we already did that set on the other side and we have minimal space to work with. But as you can see, it is doable. You can do it. It is just a little bit fiddly. Now, what we do here, instead of placing our small rings up here, or our tiny rings into these ones to lock them into place, what we're going to do first is put our tiny ring through our 4 small rings first, okay? So instead of going through 6 rings, we're only going through 4 rings. So it's a little bit easier for you, okay? You can see straight away we've got more ring to grab, so it's not as difficult. And then once you've closed that up, you can take up another one of your tiny rings and you can feed it through the pair of large and then that center tiny ring. Do it up and repeat on the other section. So again, through, well, it doesn't matter which ones you go through first. I'm going through the center ring first, and then I'm going to go through my pair of large rings and do it up. Okay, and you can see same effect. So whatever works best for you, go ahead and do that. As I said, that second way that I showed you is really tricky for the first ones, but it's not so tricky for the next ones because you've already got this one locked in place. So you're not trying to hold 2 lots of rings in place, and you also have less rings to put your tiny rings through, so it becomes easier for you. So I would suggest giving both ways a go and seeing which one works for you. If you find that they are just not working either way for you, then perhaps swap out those tiny rings for the small rings. But keep in mind that your weave is going to be loose or looser, certainly not as tight as this weave is. So again, as you saw, I just popped my 2 large rings in, I folded them back, I've got it all into position. And I'm just going to pick up my 4 small rings with my tiny, okay, and close it up and then place 2 more tinies, 1 on each unit. So through the 2 large into that tiny locking ring, and then same on the other side. Go through those 3 rings and close it up. Okay. Now the other side, the other technique, I'll show you what that looks like to continue it down. So I'm going to add my large rings. Okay, I'm going to fold them back, separate out that pair of small rings. Okay, pull them all through. Now these are the ones where I lock it into place already with my tiny. Okay, so I've got the 6 rings now to go through. Take up one of my tiny rings, going through all 6, so 1 tiny and 4 small. Grabbing hold of it and closing it up. So you just do that for the length of your bracelet, or whatever it is that you're working on. And then the ends, we've got these 2 side ones done because we've done both sides, so we've just got this one here on the end. So we treat it the same, we fold it back, separate out that pair of small rings, okay, there we go. And again, you can treat this in the same manner. You can add the tiny rings to lock it into place, or you can go through just the 2 and do it that way, and then add your tiny ring. So I'll show you each way. So this side is the side where our tiny rings are added in advance. So then I'm going to take up a tiny, and because we're on the corner and on the edge, we only have to go through 4 rings this time anyway, so it's not going to be as difficult as it was. Whoops, I need to open that up a little bit more. Okay, picking up our 4 rings. This one slipped over the other side. Okay. And then on this side, I'm just going to go through the 2 that are in weave first. And then I'm going to add 2 tinies, going through the pair and then through the tiny ring that's there. And then through the other pair and through that tiny ring. Okay, and you just repeat that on the other end of your work and you're done. Okay guys, well that's it. That is the video tutorial for today. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it of use. If you did find it useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up here on YouTube. Share the video if you like. Leave some comments in the comments section. If you're not a subscriber, it'd be really great if you could do that for us. Check out some of the other content that we've got here. There's plenty for you to ruffle around in. And last but not least, guys, don't forget to give our shop link up here in the corner a little bit of love and affection. That's where we sell the bits and bobs and what's in my jigs you're going to need to whip up this weave and many others. Alright guys, thanks once again for popping in and seeing me. It really was good to see you. Hope you're keeping safe and well, and that I get to catch up with you again sometime in the very near future. Bye.